The desert wind howled through the saguaro cacti as the unmarked Lincoln Continental pulled up to Barry Goldwater's Paradise Valley estate at 2:47 a.m. on August 20th, 1976. The driver killed the headlights before reaching the main gate, a practiced move that suggested this wasn't his first clandestine delivery. In the back seat, Ronald Reagan sat rigid, his famous camera-ready composure shattered by whatever had driven him to this midnight pilgrimage. Goldwater had been expecting him. The phone call 3 hours earlier had been brief, desperate. "Barry, I need to see you. Tonight. Alone. It can't wait." The voice belonged to Reagan, but the tone, cracking with something between fear and shame, was alien to the eternal optimist who had just shocked the political world by backing Gerald Ford over his fellow conservatives at the Kansas City convention. Now, watching from his study window as Reagan emerged from the car, Goldwater saw a man transformed. The Hollywood bearing was gone, replaced by the hunched shoulders of someone carrying an invisible weight. In the moonlight, Reagan looked every one of his 65 years, perhaps more. Goldwater opened the door before Reagan could knock. No words were exchanged as the senator led his visitor through darkened hallways to the study, past Native American artifacts and photographs of aircraft, remnants of a simpler time when enemies were clear and battles were fought in daylight. "Scotch?" Goldwater offered, already pouring 2 generous measures. Reagan nodded, accepting the glass with hands that trembled slightly. He downed half in one swallow, something Goldwater had never seen him do in 20 years of friendship. Reagan was famous for nursing a single drink through entire evenings, maintaining control always, not tonight. "Barry," Reagan began, then stopped, staring into the amber liquid as if it might provide the words he needed. "What I'm about to tell you, if it gets out, it won't." Goldwater's voice carried the flat certainty of a man who had kept darker secrets. "Whatever brought you here at this hour stays here." Reagan looked up, his eyes, those famous eyes that could convey sunny optimism to millions, now red-rimmed and haunted. "You're going to hate me when you hear this. Hell, I hate myself. Let me be the judge of that." For a long moment, the only sound was the grandfather clock in the corner, its pendulum marking time like a metronome of judgment. Then Reagan spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "Kansas City was a lie, all of it. My backing Ford, my speech about party unity, every word was written by someone else, someone who owns me." Goldwater felt ice form in his chest, but kept his expression neutral. "Who? You remember 1946, when I was president of the Screen Actors Guild?" Of course. Goldwater remembered. Reagan's transformation from New Deal Democrat to conservative spokesman had begun during those tumultuous years of communist infiltration in Hollywood. "What you don't know, what nobody knows, is how I really survived those years. The official story is that I stood up to the communists, helped expose them. The truth," Reagan's laugh was bitter, devoid of any warmth. "The truth is I made a deal with devils to fight demons." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the Sonoran Desert. In the distance, the lights of Phoenix glowed like a false dawn. There was a man, Sidney Korshak. You know the name? Goldwater nodded slowly. Everyone in certain circles knew Korshak, the labor lawyer who was somehow connected to every major deal in Hollywood, whose clients included both studio executives and men with vowels at the ends of their names. The mob's man in Hollywood, though no one dared say it publicly. "Korshak came to me in '46, Reagan continued. "The communists were making moves on the Guild, real moves, not the paranoid fantasies, but actual infiltration. I was young, idealistic, thought I could fight them with Robert's Rules of Order and democratic votes." Another bitter laugh. "Korshak showed me otherwise. He had information, names, meeting places, plans, everything I needed to expose them. In exchange for nothing. That's what made it so easy to say yes. He asked for nothing except that I remember who my friends were." Reagan turned from the window, his face half in shadow. "Do you know what the road to hell is paved with, Barry? It's not good intentions. It's free favors from men who can afford to wait for payment." Goldwater poured himself another scotch, his mind racing through implications. "When did he collect?" "Small things at first. Throughout the 50s, when I was doing television, he'd ask me to hire certain people. Give a contract to this company, use that catering service. Nothing illegal, nothing I could object to. I told myself it was just business, just Hollywood politics. But it wasn't. No. Reagan returned to his chair, slumping like a marionette with cut strings. By the time I realized how deep I was, it was too late. They had everything. Records of every favor, every deal, every compromise. But more than that, they had things I'd done that would destroy not just me, but Nancy, the kids, everyone who believed in me. What things? Goldwater's voice was gentle but insistent. Reagan's hands covered his face. When he spoke, the words were muffled, as if he couldn't bear to hear them clearly himself. There was a girl, an actress. She was 17, Barry. I swear to God I thought she was older. She looked 25, had papers saying she was 21. It was 1952, a party at Korshak's house. I was drinking, Nancy and I were having problems. Christ, even now I'm making excuses. What happened? What do you think happened? I woke up the next morning in a hotel room with her, no memory of how I got there. Korshak's people were already there with a camera, taking pictures of me trying to leave. The girl was crying, saying I'd forced her. Reagan's voice broke entirely. Goldwater felt his stomach turn, but forced himself to ask, "Did you?" I don't know. The anguish in Reagan's voice was raw, primal. I genuinely don't remember anything after the third drink at that party. But whether I did or didn't doesn't matter. They had pictures, they had her testimony, they had enough to destroy me. And then Korshak appeared like some guardian angel, saying he could make it all go away. For a price. Not then. That's the genius of it. He made it go away for free. The girl got a studio contract, moved to Europe, never said another word. The photos disappeared, like it never happened. Except we both knew it had. We both knew he owned those photos, that testimony, that night. The clock chimed 3 times, the sound unnaturally loud in the confession-heavy air. Goldwater understood now why Reagan had come in darkness. Some truths couldn't bear daylight. So Kansas City. They came to me a month before the convention. Not Korshak himself, he's too smart for that, but his people. They laid it out simple. Ford was good for certain business interests. A contested convention would be bad. I could fight it, support the conservative movement I'd been building for years, and watch my life destroyed. Or I could play the good soldier, back Ford, and keep my secrets buried. And you chose your reputation over your principles. Reagan flinched as if slapped. I chose my family, Barry. Can you imagine what this would do to Nancy, to Patty and Ron? They'd have to live with it forever. Reagan the rapist, Reagan the mob puppet. Every good thing I've ever done would be erased by one night I can't even remember. So you betrayed every conservative who believed in you? Yes. The word fell like a stone into still water. I stood before that convention and lied with every word. I smiled and waved and played the party unifier while knowing I was destroying everything we'd built since '64. Do you know what that feels like? To watch good people, people who trusted you, realize you've sold them out? Goldwater studied his old friend, or the man he'd thought was his friend. The conservative movement had placed such hope in Reagan, seeing him as the heir to Goldwater's legacy, the man who could package conservative principles in Hollywood charm. Now that package stood revealed as beautiful, wrapping around a rotten core. "Why tell me now?" Goldwater asked. "Why tonight?" Reagan reached into his jacket, withdrawing an envelope. "Because they are not done with me. This came yesterday." Goldwater opened it, finding a single photograph. Reagan at what appeared to be a recent meeting, shaking hands with a man whose face was turned from the camera, but whose identity was suggested by the gaudy rings on his fingers. The implications were clear. Reagan wasn't just compromised by the past, but was actively involved in the present. "That meeting was 2 weeks ago," Reagan explained. "They said it was about a movie deal. Legitimate business. But there were others there. Men I recognized from newspaper photos. FBI wanted posters. They made sure I was photographed with every one of them. Creating fresh blackmail." "Exactly. They own me, Barry, and they're making sure I know it. But it's worse than that." Reagan leaned forward, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "They're planning something. I don't know what, but there's talk about 1980, about making sure I'm the nominee. They want their man in the White House." The full horror of it hit Goldwater like a physical blow. The conservative movement, built on principles of limited government and individual freedom, was being hijacked by criminal forces that represented the antithesis of everything they claimed to believe. And the man they'd chosen as their vessel was sitting in his study, confessing through tears. "You have to stop running," Goldwater said firmly. "Withdraw from politics entirely." "I can't. Don't you understand? They won't let me. If I try to quit, they'll ask why. If I don't give them a good enough reason, they'll provide one by releasing everything. Either way, I'm finished. But at least if I play along, my family might survive with some dignity." "And if you become president?" Reagan's laugh was the sound of a soul recognizing its own damnation. "Then God help America, because I'll be taking orders from men who see the Constitution as a business obstacle." They sat in silence, two old warriors confronting a battlefield neither had trained for. Finally, Goldwater spoke, his voice carrying the weight of difficult decision. "There might be another way." Reagan looked up, hope flickering in his eyes for the first time. "What do you mean?" "Hoover's dead, but his files aren't. There are people, good people, who understand that sometimes you need to fight darkness with darkness. If we could get evidence of Korshak's operations, proof of the broader conspiracy—" "You'd be signing your own death warrant. These aren't politicians we're talking about, Barry. They're killers. I've faced killers before. Different uniform, same enemy." Goldwater's jaw set in the expression that had terrified political opponents for decades. "The question is whether you're willing to risk everything to get free." "I've already lost everything that matters. My integrity, my principles—" "Your soul isn't lost until you stop fighting for it," Goldwater interrupted. "You came here tonight. That means something in you still wants to be the man people believe you are." Reagan wiped his eyes, a gesture so incongruous with his public image that it seemed almost surreal. "What would you need me to do?" "Keep playing their game, but document everything. Meetings, phone calls, demands. Build a case from the inside while I work from the outside. When we have enough, we go to people who can act on it, federal prosecutors who aren't bought, journalists who aren't afraid. And if they find out, then we'll both probably die. But we'll die as men who remembered what they stood for, not puppets dancing on criminal strings." Reagan stood, walked to the bookshelf, running his fingers along spines of political philosophy and American history. "You know, when I first got into politics, I thought it would be like the movies. Good guys, bad guys, clear moral choices. I never imagined it would be this gray." "It's not gray, Ron. You've just been standing in shadows so long you've forgotten what light looks like." "Maybe." Reagan turned back, and for a moment Goldwater saw a flash of the man he'd once admired, the communicator who could make conservative principles sound like common sense, who could sell freedom as naturally as soap. "If we do this, if we try to break their hold, I need you to promise something." "What?" "If I don't make it, if they release everything, tell Nancy I'm sorry. Tell her I tried to find my way back." Goldwater stood, extending his hand. "Tell her yourself when this is over." They shook, two men bound now by more than ideology, bound by the kind of desperate hope that comes when all other options have been exhausted. Reagan gathered himself. Straightening his tie, smoothing his hair, reassembling the public mask he'd worn for so long, it had almost become his face. "How do we communicate?" Reagan asked. "They're probably watching my phones, my mail." Goldwater thought for a moment. "You still fly yourself sometimes?" "Yes, the Cessna. It's one of the few places I'm truly alone. There's a private strip near Sedona, owned by a friend, completely off the books. When you need to talk, file a flight plan for Phoenix, but divert there. I'll know to meet you." Reagan nodded, then paused at the study door. "Barry, why are you doing this? You could just walk away, let me sink alone." "Because once upon a time, we stood for something. Maybe we can again." Reagan left the way he'd come, through darkness toward an uncertain dawn. Goldwater watched the taillights disappear, then returned to his study. He had work to do, people to contact, favors to call in from his own shadowy past. The mob had made a critical error. They'd threatened not just a man, but a movement. And Barry Goldwater, whatever his flaws, had never backed down from a fight for principles. Over the following months, an intricate dance began. Reagan continued his public role, giving speeches about conservative values while secretly documenting every interaction with Korshak's network. The evidence he gathered painted a picture of corruption that reached far beyond Hollywood, touching politics, unions, and business across the American West. Each piece of intelligence Reagan gathered came at a cost. He would return home from mob meetings physically ill, Nancy noting his pallor and assuming it was campaign stress. He began carrying a small notebook, filling it with coded observations that looked like speech notes, but actually documented criminal conspiracies. The famous Reagan optimism became a mask he could barely maintain, cracking only in private moments when the weight of his double life threatened to crush him entirely. Goldwater, meanwhile, activated networks dormant since his intelligence days in World War II. Old friends in military intelligence, FBI agents who'd remained clean despite systemic corruption, journalists who remembered when the press was supposed to afflict the comfortable. Slowly, carefully, they built a counter-conspiracy against the conspiracy. The danger was constant. Reagan reported close calls, rooms searched while he gave speeches, cars that followed too closely on lonely roads, phone calls where no one spoke, but breathing confirmed a presence. Once, he arrived at the Cessna to find subtle signs of tampering, forcing him to cancel a planned meeting with Goldwater. The message was clear. We're watching, we know, be careful. Goldwater faced his own shadows, including a break-in at his Arizona home that took nothing but left clear signs of intrusion. His office phones developed mysterious clicks. Old friends suddenly became unavailable when he called. The mob was flexing its muscles, reminding both men of the price of defiance. They met only 3 times at the Sedona Strip, each meeting revealing more of the web's extent. The first meeting, in October 1976, lasted barely 30 minutes. Reagan was so paranoid he could barely speak coherently, jumping at every sound from the desert. But he had brought evidence, photographs of mob figures at political fundraisers, tape recordings of conversations where criminal money was discussed as casually as weather. They own judges, Reagan reported, his voice hollow. Federal judges, Barry. They laugh about cases that will never see real prosecution because the verdict's already bought. The second meeting, in January 1977, revealed the international scope. Reagan had discovered connections between Korshak's network and crime families in Chicago, New York, even overseas operations in Cuba and Italy. The mob wasn't just influencing American politics. It was part of a global criminal enterprise that saw democracy as a commodity to be purchased. They talk about presidents like they're hiring middle management, Reagan said, producing documents that showed campaign contributions laundered through dozens of legitimate businesses. They have scenarios for every election through 1988. Republicans, Democrats. Doesn't matter. They're hedging every bet. But it was the third meeting, in March 1977, that nearly ended everything. Reagan arrived shaken beyond anything Goldwater had seen. They know, he said simply. Not everything, but enough. Korshak himself called yesterday. Didn't threaten, didn't accuse, just said he hoped I was being prudent in my associations. Then we're out of time. Goldwater had prepared for this moment, though he'd hoped it would come later. I have a federal prosecutor in Phoenix, absolutely clean. More importantly, I have a journalist, Bob Woodward. He's interested, has the platform to make this impossible to ignore. Watergate Woodward? The same. He smells another story of the century. If we give him everything, simultaneously filing with the prosecutor, they can't bury it. Reagan closed his eyes, seeing perhaps the tsunami that would follow, the headlines, the trials, the destruction of reputation he'd sacrificed everything to protect. But when he opened them, there was peace there, the kind that comes with final decisions. When? Next week. Can you get everything to Phoenix? I'll find a way. But they'd underestimated their enemy's reach. 3 days later, Nancy Reagan was nearly run off Mulholland Drive by a vehicle that witnesses described as deliberately ramming her car before speeding away. She escaped with minor injuries, but the message was clear. We can reach your family whenever we choose. Reagan called Goldwater that night from a payphone, voice shaking with rage and fear. They tried to kill her, Barry. Nancy. She could have died because of my crusade for redemption. All the more reason to end this. They're escalating because they're scared. Or because they're confident. What if going public just makes them release everything anyway? What if— Ron, Goldwater's voice cut through the panic. This is the moment. Either you're a free man who made mistakes, or you're a slave who'll make more. Choose. The silence stretched long before Reagan spoke again. Give me 2 days. I need to make sure Nancy and the kids are somewhere safe. Then we do it. Those 2 days changed everything. On the first, Sidney Korshak suffered a massive heart attack, so massive that some wondered how a man in apparent good health could be struck down so suddenly. He survived but emerged from the hospital a changed man, his memory supposedly damaged, his influence mysteriously evaporated. On the second day, Reagan received a new envelope. This one contained not threats but the original photographs from 1952, along with negatives and a signed affidavit from the actress, now a respected European film director, stating that nothing inappropriate had occurred, that she had been paid to create the scenario, but Reagan had passed out before anything happened. The package included a note: Mr. Korshak's retirement gift. No further obligations. Our interests in your political future have ended. Reagan brought everything to Goldwater, who studied the materials with the eye of someone who'd seen too many intelligence operations to believe in coincidences. Someone got to them, Goldwater concluded. Someone with more power than the mob. Who has more power than the mob? Governments, specifically governments who don't want criminal organizations controlling American presidents. Goldwater's smile was grim. I may have made some calls to old friends in places that officially don't exist. They may have made some calls of their own. The CIA. Let's just say that certain patriots in various agencies agree that the presidency should be controlled by votes, not blackmail. Korshak was given a choice: retire with health problems or face problems no doctor could solve. Reagan sank into a chair, the weight of 3 decades lifting so suddenly he seemed to float. It's over? Just like that. Your obligation to them is over. What you do with your freedom is up to you. I can't run in 1980, not after this. Even if the public never knows, I know. I've been compromised, Barry. That doesn't just go away. Goldwater poured 2 scotches, this time in celebration rather than confession. That's where you're wrong, Ron. You've been tested and found your way back. That's not compromise. That's redemption. Pretty words don't change ugly truths. No, but actions do. You want to atone? Then use what you've learned. Run in 1980, but run clean. No backroom deals, no compromises with devils. Show them and yourself that Ronald Reagan can stand on his own. It would take months more before Reagan truly believed in his freedom. He tested it carefully. A speech here that offended certain interests. A position there that no mob-owned politician would dare take. Each time, he braced for retaliation that never came. Slowly, the real Ronald Reagan emerged from the shell that fear had built. The 1980 campaign, when it came, carried special significance for those who knew the secret history. Reagan ran as a conservative purist, accepting no questionable money, making no deals with shadowy figures. When he won, Goldwater was among the first to call. You did it clean, Goldwater said simply. Thanks to you. If you hadn't been there that night, you came to me, Ron. That took the real courage. I just showed you a way out. Barry, I need to ask, did you keep copies of everything? Goldwater's pause was answer enough. Insurance, he said finally. Not against you, but against them. If they ever try to resurrect their influence. I understand. And Barry, thank you for believing there was something in me worth saving. The Reagan presidency would have its own controversies, its own shadows, Iran-Contra, echoing like a ghost of old compromises. But those who knew the full story saw in Reagan's occasional haunted looks not guilt over present actions, but memory of past chains and determination never to wear them again. Goldwater kept his promise, taking the secret to his grave in 1998. Reagan followed in 2004, his Alzheimer's perhaps a mercy that allowed him to forget what he'd once been forced to remember. But history has a way of preserving truth. In 2015, the actress from that night in 1952, now in her 80s, gave an interview to a French documentarian. She spoke carefully, legally, but those who knew how to listen heard the story. A young woman paid to compromise a rising star, a blackmail operation that spiraled beyond anyone's intention, and a night where nothing happened because the target had been drugged into unconsciousness before the trap could close. "He was a good man caught by bad people," she said in still accented English. "I've carried guilt for my part for over 60 years, but I was 17, afraid, told it was just Hollywood business. We were all victims of men who saw human weakness as commodity. The real monument to that night isn't in stone or bronze, but in the knowledge that even the most compromised can find redemption, that even the most powerful corruption can be fought, and that sometimes, in the darkest hours, confession to the right person can be the beginning of salvation rather than its end." Today, the study in Paradise Valley stands renovated but unchanged in spirit. On certain August nights when the desert wind howls just right, locals claim to hear echoes of that conversation. Two men wrestling with the weight of truth, the price of silence, and the possibility of redemption. That, perhaps, is the real lesson of Reagan's midnight confession. Not that good men never fall, but that fallen men can still choose to rise. And sometimes, all it takes is someone willing to listen in the dark and point the way back to dawn.